this is Rich Lee from the Hall Institute of Public Policy, and welcome to the Hall Institute Public Forum. This is part of our special New Jersey Media Roundtable series, where we're taking a look at the journalism industry in New Jersey, where it is, how we got there, and where we're headed. And with me today are two people who cover New Jersey for their respective organizations, and it's kind of ironic. They're each from news organizations that are based outside of New Jersey, and that is Matt Katz of the Philadelphia Inquirer and Lisa Fleisher of the Wall Street Journal. Matt, Lisa, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Okay. I'd actually like to kind of pick up on that point and maybe start with you, Lisa, because what we've seen in the industry over the last 5, 10, even longer, number of years is, in terms of State House coverage, less coverage. Bureaus getting smaller, some bureaus closing, and the Wall Street Journal seems to be running counter to that trend. Like, didn't have a bureau before, now has a full-time reporter covering New Jersey. What's up with that?
So the Wall Street Journal just started, just over a year ago, a section called Greater New York, and it is basically a metro section that covers the New York metro area, as it says, Greater New York. And originally they didn't have a full-time reporter covering New Jersey, but I think they realized we've got enough news going on here. We've got a, sort of a governor who's getting enough attention that we need a full-time New Jersey reporter. So I had a friend who was working there, and they called me up and said, "Hey, could you come over there?" I was working for the Star Ledger before. So, there's just so much happening in New Jersey that it's just really great. And plus, they have a ton of subscribers in New Jersey, actually. I looked at the circulation figures, and I'm not sure if I'm supposed to share all this, but, we've got a very healthy subscriber base in northern New Jersey. And, of course, people are pretty familiar with who the subscribers of the Wall Street Journal are, so.
Yeah, it seems like, there's been a lot going on. Like, you haven't really missed a beat since you moved from the Ledger to the Wall Street Journal. It's been
people ask me about the difference, and I'm just like, well, before I was part of a team of like 6 or 7 people, and now it's just me, but, down at the State House about half my time, and half my time sometimes in the city. Right,
okay. Matt, and I don't expect you to speak on behalf of the Inquirer, but it's a little bit different in that, in terms, I've been involved with Trenton. The Inquirer has always had a bureau and has not only covered New Jersey, but covered it closely and had a bureau sometimes larger than some of the others. And I know you have a large subscriber base in New Jersey, but why is it important for a Philadelphia newspaper to cover New Jersey as closely as it does?
Yeah, sure. We have most of our circulation is actually in the suburbs of Philadelphia. So 20% approximately, I think, of our circulation is in South Jersey. We're the largest newspaper in some counties in South Jersey. So they've always had a presence. We're probably somewhat smaller than we were in the heyday of newspapers.
Most places are these days.
Right.
Yeah.
The one tweak they've made about 6 months ago was to instead of having 2 State House reporters focusing on whatever was going on in the State House and the legislature and the governor, they took one reporter, me, to focus more specifically on the governor. And that sometimes allows me to just follow the governor wherever he is, as you know. Right. Sometimes it means covering stuff in the legislature, like this week with pension and health benefits reform. It obviously intersects with what's going on with the legislature. But they've taken a more Christie-centric focus for my beat because he is remarkably newsy.
Yeah, people say he makes news every time he opens his mouth, but
which is kind of true.
Yeah, you think there's more emphasis on covering Governor Christie because of who he is, as opposed to another governor?
Well, I think that the New York publications at least covered Corzine fairly well because of his former position as CEO of Goldman, and he's still very much in some of that industry news. But certainly there's a lot more national focus on Governor Christie, partially because he's such a great communicator and partially because of the changes he's trying to enact in New Jersey.
Yeah, and just, recently with what's happening in pensions, I noticed stories not only in the, New Jersey, Philadelphia, New York papers, but nationally talking about what's happening in terms of pension reform.
And always nationally, we repeat this all the time, but always nationally, people look at New Jersey governors and sometimes Virginia governors because of the gubernatorial election cycle, which is a year in advance. So often they get to kind of catch that wave of whatever sort of reform trend is happening beforehand.
And there's interest in Pennsylvania in general in Christie as a politician. And that's why I'm blogging specifically about Christie, and a lot of the feedback I get is from Pennsylvania people. And as I try to tell people, if this guy is going to be running for president, we are in a swing state, Pennsylvania.
Right, yeah.
And the suburbs of Pennsylvania, of Philadelphia, could be some of the most important zip codes in the country for electing a president. So I don't know if that increases the interest level for people there, but it might.
Yeah, and there is that national interest. We were talking before the show. I just finished a trip and traveling in Minnesota, Illinois. People here are from New Jersey, and particularly this week because the governor was making the rounds. I think he was on CNN and some other shows, and they had seen him, and everybody's asking me about the governor. And
every single question, the first thing people ask me is he running for president? I'm like, yeah, well, if I knew that,
Right. You'd report it.
Yeah.
Everyone would know it. I would tweet it.
Yeah, we'll get to that later. I mean, he's been consistent in saying he's not running, but sometimes his actions, might indicate otherwise.
I remember the first time I think he was asked about this. Max Pizarro from Politicker asked him when we were at the, I forgot the name of the company. It's a box company up in North Jersey. And he went on like this huge, rant about how he's not going to run for president. And he said it in like 12 different ways, just that one time. Right. And we had it like on a column on the front page of the Star Ledger. I was working at the Star Ledger at the time. And people were like writing to me like, why are you guys even writing about this? Why is anybody asking about this? And sure enough, like for the next year, that's all anyone was talking about.
Yeah, and it's just when you think it's died down and something else happens again. Yep. Yeah, you see it. So, I want to talk maybe in a little bit broader terms about the industry. And there seems to be a sense out there that the journalism industry is in trouble or that it's dying. And I always say it depends if you look at the glasses being half empty, half full. I mean, I think if you separate out the business side from the journalism side, the business side has its issues, but I still see the journalism side, doing well. People, like yourselves, doing good reporting. I'm curious as to why. Are you optimistic about the future? I'm guessing you're both young. You're working in journalism. Why are you doing what you do?
I mean, I started in full time as a reporter in New Jersey, the Daily Record in Morris County, in the summer of 2000, and I've been told since that time that the industry was falling apart, right. And veteran reporters would say, "Why would you possibly, become a journalist in the year 2000?" And still here 11 years later. Yeah. So I would say my glass is half full. I mean, obviously we're in a changing period, and things are unsettled. And it's my paper just came out of bankruptcy 6 months ago, and there's a lot of, it's a difficult time in some respects, but I think there's a lot of great, healthy journalism going on, and there's really interesting, exciting models. And while you might have a smaller press corps in total in Trenton, you have new entities, and you have the Wall Street Journal for the first time having a reporter in Trenton every day, and you have websites that are doing remarkably good stuff, both on policy end of things and the political end of things. So
like NJ Spotlight.
Right, yeah, Spotlight, Politics, absolutely. And then there's convergence going on. If you go to the South Jersey page of Philly.com, our website, you can get linked right off there, NJ Spotlight articles. So there's convergence going on with what might become of the new NJN and the Star Ledger, and those are interesting models. You don't know where they might go, if it might work, or if it's fiscally feasible, but it's something to be excited about, something to be at least keep the glass half full about.
Yeah, I think from a consumer standpoint, it's great because there's more ways to get news and information than ever before, and we get it faster than ever.
And free if you're a consumer, and that's part of the problem. But it is great if you're a consumer right now, but eventually people are going to start having to pay $1 or $2.
I don't really think about it on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I think about it maybe twice a year when I start to think of what I would do if I were in charge and could really do things. There's some really great kind of labs around the country that sponsor fellowships to say, well, what would you do and what kind of models would you start? There's foundations that are giving money. But I mean, why? I can't see myself doing anything else. I mean, it's just there's news there, and there's a lot of stuff to talk about, a lot of stuff to explore. Matt said there's definitely fewer people, I think, doing it. At least just in the total paper, I think you might see a decrease in a lot of the local news, like meeting coverage and that sort of thing.
But then you have the patches picking up on stuff like that.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. I'm trying to figure out a way to read all the patches.
Yeah, that must be tough.
It's a little difficult. Yeah. I put together a Twitter list that helps me sort of scan some of them, but it's
especially if they tweet frequently. A lot to sift through.
But you do see a sort of different type of writing maybe going on there.
Yeah. So, let's talk about what's changed in the industry. And we mentioned like a lot of the guests that I've had on the show have been older journalists who've been around for a number of years, and it's pretty clear what's changed. More people are getting their news online, as I said, getting it faster than ever before. And I know, Matt, before we started, you said just in the time you've been covering the news, you've seen a lot of changes. What are some of the more recent changes, like, say, since 2000?
I mean, if you were to look from where, let's say, you know, Christie Todd Whitman was standing at a press conference 10, 15 years ago to where Governor Christie is standing now, and just look at the difference between what the press corps looks like in terms of what tools they're using to report.
Yeah.
I mean, it would just be startling. I mean, I imagine everybody had a note and pad and tape recorders.
That was about it. Yeah, when I was a reporter. Yeah.
And now, not only does almost everybody have a computer, but you know, I'm using a wireless keyboard attached to an iPad that's on the floor. Lisa and Ginger from the Star Ledger are live tweeting almost everything that's being said. So you could actually read the press conference at home.
Yeah.
The Star Ledger, Bloomberg News probably have a camera in the back. So these written word media entities are filming what's happening. I mean, it's the way the tools, I think, is something that has changed so remarkably quickly.
Yesterday, a new reporter for the AP, Josh Lederman, tweeted that I'm filing in 3 different modes. You know, radio, print, and what did he say? Video. And it was funny because I just remembered, actually, my mom was originally, like, in her career, a journalist for a short period of time, and she worked for AP, and she told me stories about how back in the early 80s she would also file for radio. So while, you know, it's sort of much faster, you can't say that everything's changed completely.
Yeah, I think, you know, the basics of reporting and being a journalist are the same. You're using different tools and it's getting out there more quickly. Talk about, you know, Twitter, because I mean, that's kind of what intrigued me when we, you know, thought about having you as a guest. I know Lisa and, as you said, Ginger, I think I watched one of the governor's town meetings, and it was just really fascinating to see, like, blow-by-blow account. I mean, you know, why do you do that, and what sort of feedback do you get on that sort of thing?
I don't know. I don't know why I do it. I mean, I think we're all sort of figuring it out as we go along. I kind of see Twitter as almost a direct stream of sort of what I'm interested in and what I see in news that I see. Each of the reporters in Trenton probably do use Twitter differently, and basically, Twitter, if for people who don't know what Twitter is, it's a collection of very short bursts of information. It's links to stories that are interesting. It's observations. It's jokes. I mean, the people I follow on Twitter, it's a big mix of reporters, old friends from when I was a kid. And
it's interesting to see the mix, too, because you'll see somebody tweeting about what they're covering, or, you know, in my case, like what we're writing about. But then you'll see a personal thing, like, you know, saw so-and-so, or stopped in and had good food or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, usually the criticism that comes up is, well, why do I want to know what you're having for lunch today, or why do I know how many Twinkies you ate? And it's like, whenever I hear that, I'm like, oh my gosh, you just don't understand Twitter. You don't understand what it is and what it's used for, because it's not about, like, just, you know, it's about useful information. It's about, you know, with everything I try to put on there is either something that I find interesting or useful. And, you know, I guess the best measure of whether I'm doing it well is whether I get retweeted, because then I feel like if somebody retweets me, which basically is like forwarding what you say to other people, it tells me that whatever I put out there was useful and interesting, and other people find it valuable as well. So I guess to sort of address what you were talking about with the town halls, Ginger and I are probably the 2 people in the press corps that do this the most, but there's more people who are starting to do this as well. We'll do something called live tweet, which is basically, you know, as the program or whatever it is, town hall, press conference, event is happening yesterday with the protests on Monday, you basically say what you observe and what's being said. Ginger probably does a little bit more, like, definite blow-by-blow. I try to basically just say, like, if there's something that's new or interesting, because oftentimes with the town hall, with Chris Christie, he's done 20 this year at least. So they basically follow the same format. I mean, it's a stump speech. You know, he goes through the same speech. And if there's something new, I'll put it out there. Or if there's something like where I can add context. Like if the governor says something and it's not right, or if the governor says something that, you know, needs a little bit more of explanation, or if I remember a story that I saw or wrote from the past, and I can bring it up and quickly link to it to say, like, oh, by the way, for context, here's what we're doing, here's what we're talking about. You know, that's how I'll use it. we also Twitter is kind of it's fascinating to me because it's very collegial for the reporters in the press corps. Like I'll retweet Matt all the time. I'll retweet Ginger if she's like, oftentimes like when we're both out of state at the same event, if she picks up something that the governor said that I didn't have time to type out, I'll just retweet that because it's just much easier. Or if she notices something, or she'll do the same with me.
Yeah, I find that in general with the new environment, it's actually pretty liberating. Like I have no problem, and my editors have no problem with me linking to other stories. I wrote a story on Sunday about NJN that was more featurey about what they deal with on a day-to-day basis. And at the same day, Charlie Style from the Bergen Record wrote a more in-depth political analysis of the politics behind the deal. And and when I blogged my story, I also linked to Charlie's because combined it gives a fuller picture. And that would be, I mean, that would be doing that 20 years ago. Putting a competitor's story in your paper. It's like it's insane. But now that is a new kind of liberating, exciting part of the new technology. And we still hate being beat. I mean, it does not. It still is terrible. Yeah. But that doesn't mean you can't. You kind of be collegial in that manner and link to other people.
Because what I figure is people who are following me are interested in what I think is interesting or what the information I have to share. And if Matt breaks a story, which he often does, I want to share it with everybody who's interested in New Jersey. And so I'll just quickly tweet it and say, you guys should check out this story. It's important.
What's also funny about breaking a story now, you only break it for 15 or 20 minutes.
Right, because once it's there, it's shared with...
Right, exactly. And then everybody else. So it's different from, in that sense, the way it used to be. So you can just retweet anybody. Lisa broke a story a couple months ago about the New Jersey having more money than anticipated.
Yes, that wasn't it.
And I think everybody else then, it went elsewhere. Maybe you had it exclusively for an hour, and then... longer.
2 hours, who knows?
But I mean, everybody else was able, quickly followed suit. So and what was interesting about when you broke that, it was about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So everybody else had it in the next day's paper. So if you're just reading the paper, you would have no idea that. You actually had a first.
I'm trying to think because I remember the timing on the email that I got from it, and then I think it was like actually earlier. Like I think it was like 3:30 or 4, because some people were marveling at how quickly it was leaked, and then I got it up there and everything. But yeah, I mean, then everyone was able to sort of get this internal document that I got, and the next day everyone had it. I think the Star Ledger had it on the front page.
Right.
Obtained by the Star Ledger.
Right.
Is that frustrating for you too, as reporters, that you don't own the exclusive for longer, or on the other hand, is it nice when you see so many people reposting it or linking to it?
It works both ways, I guess.
I mean, it's nice when you get sort of credit for it. If if someone says first report about the Wall Street Journal or
I mean, truth be told, back in the day, it was always an inside game anyway. I mean, nobody really, you didn't
I think we look for that stuff. I think the general reader doesn't care.
Exactly. Except for Watergate. I mean, people didn't know who broke what generally back in the day. So there's still that, you still get the same
My favorite story about that is when I was an intern at the New York Daily News in college, and I had written my first story for the paper, and so I went over to my friend who's not a journalist, and I showed her. I was like, look at this story. And I showed her the paper, and she's like reading it, and she's like, okay, maybe it wasn't that interesting of a story. And I was like, and she goes, what's the bit? And I said, I wrote it. And she didn't look at the byline at all. And she's like, oh, okay.
Right.
So it's like,
it's a humbling.
Yeah, you have to, it's a certain group of people who can appreciate what goes into all those things.
I also have a funny anecdote actually just yesterday about Twitter. Yesterday, I'd heard early, I was dealing with a broken down car and everything. So I'd heard early that the health part of the in-state, out-of-state network part of the healthcare bill.
Right, yeah.
It's trying to use shorthand. I hope everyone understands what I'm talking about. Was going to be sort of taken out or dealt with in a different way. And so I'm emailing people trying to figure out if this is true or whatever. And then as I'm on the phone with my dad, and I'd gotten confirmation, and so, but before I got a chance to actually write a story and put it online, there was a press release that went out. So I was like, oh well, this is sort of blown. But so I quickly just tweeted something. And then somebody said to me, later, they're like, "Oh, well, you broke that on Twitter," and I was like, "It was like 15 seconds." And I don't really consider it, I don't consider it breaking it. I just because the press release had already gone out.
Right, sure.
But yeah.
But yeah, that's where they saw it first.
Right.
I have another story along those lines. A bunch of Iowa fundraisers came to drum thwacket to woo the governor to run for president, and I'm debating all weekend whether I should stake out the governor's mansion and like for the off chance that these people are going to come out and say Governor Christie has decided to run for president, So I decide, what, I work too much, I'm going to go home. So I'm following the reporters who are staking it out on Twitter, and a reporter from the Des Moines Register actually posted first a quote from the guys in the
Iowa people.
They weren't there. They'd called them or something, right?
Right. And it wasn't, she had called them, so she was the first person to speak to them, so she writes a blog, or I think she put it on Twitter. So then I took that and put it on Twitter, and I became, from my pajamas at home, the first New Jersey reporter to break the no news that came out of that day. So, I mean, it was all sort of absurd.
Yeah, it's amazing the things that you can do today, and, you appreciate them. I probably, appreciate the difference a lot more, as you said, back, literally did my first stories on typewriters when we got computers. That was like an amazing thing. And now, we deal with all this stuff.
My mom would tell me that, when she was working at AP, there would be the mad rush for the phone bank.
Right.
They would literally she told me they'd run across an entire field and they'd fight each other to get to the phone. And if there was 3 phones and there were 10 reporters, it was like, the most ferocious game of musical chairs ever. And now it's just like...
Everybody's...
There's a story I tell, and I think I've done it on the show, but I've also done it when I teach, about when I was a reporter, I had to cover, some people were killed, their house was struck by lightning, a couple of people were killed. So they sent me down to cover the story, talk to neighbors, talk to police, got the basic facts. And my wife was having lunch with friends of ours in the next town. So I went over, joined them for lunch, had a nice lunch, went back to the office, called the police again to get an update, and the story was in the paper the next day. And,
amazing.
Today, you would have been down there, you would have been tweeting or on your BlackBerry as soon as you got the first shreds of information. But it just, to me, I think that's a good illustration of how much time, and like I made the deadline, didn't get beat by anybody. Had time for a nice lunch, which I rarely did as a reporter.
I mean, it doesn't stop now. I mean, you wake up and you have to check Twitter. I check my RSS feeds from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep, which is collecting all the articles written about the governor. I mean, it's exhausting because of the new technology.
Well, it's funny. Somebody put out a study recently. I don't know what it was, or can't cite it, but they were talking about how so many people read their phones or their computers before they get out of bed. I'm like, yeah, but how many people would basically get the newspaper and do the same thing in bed?
Yeah, as soon as if it's on your doorstep or whatever.
Right. I mean, it's all about content and information, and it's all the same basic stuff.
Yeah. A lot of it, that as you said, the technology has changed, but what journalists do, what consumers do is similar.
But I think it's allowed you to be a better reporter more easily and display information on the web. And I mean, some of the stuff that the Journal does or that the New York Times does online with graphics and the ability to display information is just amazing. And for the helicopter story recently, I mean, how quickly was I able to find out all the different times that different governors had used helicopters in the past and got in trouble for it? And, I was doing searches of past articles, and I saw one of them had been written by the governor's current spokesman, which is kind of a little irony thing about how these things come up and again and again and again.
Is there a downside to this? I guess what I'm looking for, what's the net effect of everything that's changed? Is the public better informed, less informed than they were before all these changes?
The risk is that you're covering the moment to moment so much that it's hard to take a step back, and it's hard to argue that you need 2 weeks off to file 20 open requests and really find out what's going on in government. So the concern is that there's a lot of moment to moment surface coverage about what's said and not enough time and appetite for digging into something more in depth. That's the risk.
Do you see some of these new entities like NJ Spotlight maybe filling that gap?
They could if they. If, hopefully, there's the
funding,
and the business model behind it. But yeah, that would be. I mean, they have veteran people working for them.
But I still see you, and I mean, I try to do this. Really taking that step back, and the Ledger does it, and there is still stuff there, but perhaps there's not like a few people that are necessarily dedicated. Maybe there's not as much of it, but you still try to. And if editors are open to it. Like if you want to, thankfully, at a paper like mine, if you want to pitch something, say like, hey, I need a few days or a few weeks to really do something. I've seen other reporters definitely get that time. Yeah. But in terms of the downside, I mean, you were saying, is the public more or less informed? Right. I mean, I really find that people are as informed as they decide to be, and they can find the information is out there if they want to find it, and if they use resources or sources, I guess, that are credible. I have people who email me sometimes, and I have relatives who email me, and they say, well, what about this, and this, and I'll have to like go and sort of, if it's someone I can really engage.
I have relatives like that too. So I all do.
Yeah, and they cited some crazy website, which is like just somebody who knows who these people are, and they're pushing an agenda, and they're not really presenting the real facts, or I'll have to dig up a little bit of research and also say, okay, well, no, but here's where the truth lies. So if you want to be informed, I think it's much more easy to be informed because you don't have just like the 3 evening news choices. You don't just have like your one paper that you subscribe to. You have such a wealth of information that if you choose to, you can be better informed.
Yeah, I think it's there, and it does put a little bit more onus on the public because you have to be more discerning about what's out there. You can't just go to a website and take it at face value.
Right, and people talk about the front page a lot, and the Ledger, for example, on Sundays now has like 2 stories on the front page often. And so what does that say about the news judgment for putting a story on the front page? Like sometimes people are like, well, why isn't it on the front page? And I'm like, it's still being covered. Just because it's not necessarily on the front page or on the front page for very long. There's maybe fewer stories that are editorially placed on the front page, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What about in terms of, one of the big responsibilities of the press is to hold government accountable. Is that government more or less accountable? I know now people in power have the ability to bypass you guys, that they don't have to rely on, coming, a press conference or putting out a press release and going through the scrutiny of the news media. They can put stuff right on the web, use social networks and get information to the public.
I hope they're just as accountable as they better feel accountable. Yeah. That's the only reason we're here. Yeah. There's might be some fallout because we don't have as many bodies as we used to, but I hope we're holding them just as accountable as ever.
Yeah.
I think they're perhaps more accountable in some senses, even if they don't choose to see it that way. Because it's basically they're about as accountable as the information that we can access. So if there's laws that prevent us from getting information from the government, then what are you going to do? You have to rely on sources. You have to work harder to get information. If the governor puts a block on all information out of his office, that's that it makes it harder for us. But at the same time, you have places like PolitiFact or we do a lot of fact checking, even people don't see it, which again you have to find what you want to find.
Sure.
And it'll there's actually more recording of what is said, so you can go back and pull a clip and say, well, you said this on this date, so what now?
Right. And you can access it very well more quickly than you could in the past. Yeah.
Christie's pretty good at being relatively accountable available when he wants to be. Sometimes he'll take a couple weeks off from answering questions, but people can bypass the press if they want to, but that's to the peril of the people who are listening or reading. You're reading right from a politician, so that's propaganda.
Right. Okay. One of the things I've been looking at in my research is a process called agenda setting, which I think was theory developed back in the early 70s, that it's really the press that sets the agenda for public policy. What the press chooses to write about is what the public then cares about, and ultimately what decision makers act on. I don't know if you buy into that theory, but from your experience, do you feel you guys are helping to set the agenda, or are you just reporting on what is set out there?
That's interesting.
Well, that's going to be my dissertation, so you don't have to answer it in 140 characters.
I think in my short time covering Trenton, it seems that Governor Christie has succeeded at setting much of the agenda. Because he is aggressive and has proposed pretty historic legislation and and we've covered it,
right?
Because it's important, and that's what's actually happening. So, in some respect, I mean, the controversies are a separate entity, and then that becomes obviously more press driven. But he's a pretty hard charging guy, and he's been successful at setting the agenda, and they know what they're going to be doing next week and a month from now, and they push it in that way.
Yeah, I always tell people, regardless of how you feel about him, he's great at working with the media. Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
I think it's I think he's good at sort of planning the agenda, and it's an extreme give and take. Yeah, I think we might have run out of time.
Yeah, well, I'm hearing a beep, so that's our new timer. So it's a webcast, so we're not on a strict time schedule. We're about a half an hour. It's gone quickly, so this is great talking with you. Yeah,
no, not this
time.
Camera time, not this time.
Yeah, we could probably
before
keep
on Twitter we were talking about this, and Matt was joking, not to hog all his camera time. But no, I mean, it's sort of the agenda. I don't know. Maybe I'm not thinking about that enough, but. You try to cover what's important and what's really affecting people's lives, and not necessarily like dictating. You don't want to like necessarily dictate what's going on, but I mean, I guess editorial pages probably try to do that. Yeah. But I feel like it's a give and take. Whatever politicians are talking about and doing. Like I might not cover a bill that has no chance of passing or but if it really impacts the discussion. And if it could impact policy down the line, like probably I'll cover it. In terms of the public, they can I guess at its most basic level, the public dictates the agenda because they're the ones who are buying the newspapers, or maybe not.
Yeah, I always tell people it's kind of like what came first, the chicken or the egg sort of thing.
I mean, look at the Daily News and the New York Post. I mean, you can see a good example of what they think is going to sell, and that's the agenda.
Yeah. There are some issues now that I think about it that he has not brought up that the press has set the agenda on or written a lot about, like proposed cuts to Medicaid, which he has not. This is not something that he's emphasized. He has not put out a press release about it. But there have been articles in, I would imagine, every publication that covers the state about it. So it's both.
I was thinking back also, I guess just about a year ago, the race to the top funds, and when we lost the money, that was I'm sure something he didn't plan on. Spending, being in the news as much.
That's true.
About that.
Or
that was a fun 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, with that, it's been great talking with you. The time has zipped right by. We went right past our timer.
Can we? I'd like to just say, I mean, if whoever's watching this, please ask us questions. I mean, I think that maybe perhaps now more than ever, reporters hopefully are more engaged with their readers and the public. I try to respond to all email I get, and I try to respond to all maybe some Twitter replies I get, and sometimes that's a little more difficult to really keep up with. But
at least we have graphics with your contact information. So
I respond to everyone, even those people that call me a fascist or a socialist. I will respond.
Those are probably the more interesting ones.
Right.
The best is when you actually get you sort of educate a person and sort of maybe even change their mind. I ended up getting someone thanking me at the end.
That happens all the time.
I love it. Yeah.
People screaming and yelling all caps, and then you respond. You're wrong. This is why. Wow, thank you for responding.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Because a lot of times people don't expect a response.
They don't,
or an answer that makes sense to them.
And sometimes, no matter how much you explain this is why something happened, they're not satisfied.
Yeah.
But at least you try.
Right.
And in that sense, that hasn't changed. So, okay. Well, thanks for chatting. Lisa Fleisher from the Wall Street Journal, Matt Katz from the Philadelphia Inquirer. This is Rich Lee from the Hall Institute of Public Policy. You've been watching the Hall Institute Public Forum, part of our New Jersey Media Roundtable series. Thanks for watching. Please join us again next time.
Thank you. Is that how you spell it? Okay. No, they're fine.